In today's story, we follow a man born in the frozen wastes of Argmith, where hunger and death were the only constants. Fleeing north with his cousin, he found warmth, food, and even love. But survival came at the cost of becoming a bandit. Yet, no feast lasts forever, and when Brutania strikes back, he will lose everything in one night, except the desperate promise to save his daughter. Welcome to Krane Originals, home of original fantasy tales set in Sha'Rune, a world of mystery, heartbreak, and triumph, touched by just the right amount of magic. If you crave new original stories every week and enjoy what you see, then don't forget to hit that like and subscribe and join the adventure. Now, let the tale begin. This is the story of the bandit. In the year 1687 of the Second Era, Brutania was known for many things, from its great vineyards to its beautiful roaming mountain ranges to its forests as thick and old as time. But in recent years, to the far south, the country has increasingly been known for something else. Something far worse. For you see, the men from the lands of Argmith, a country most fierce and unforgiving, where not much food grew and even fewer animals to hunt, had found their way into Brutania. Now, it was not uncommon for there to be raids and attacks to happen to the smaller villages to the south by the Argmith inhabitants. But in the past few years, the frequency of such attacks had become all too common. Now, you may think this is a story of one such attack, but you'd be wrong. This is so much more. This is the story of one of the bandits and his journey through a country that didn't want him, but a home that he couldn't survive in. Our tale begins on a calm day. The weather was still and the skies were clear. It was days like these that made Jorick the most uncomfortable. It was these kinds of days that made the anxiety in his stomach almost unbearable. It had been 7 months since he was convinced by his cousin Eric to venture north after a harsh winter. Now you see, Argmith was already infamous for its cold weather, but the winter they had just suffered was truly like nothing they had ever seen before. The winds were so cold it felt like knives through their lungs each night, and keeping a fire felt like it was almost impossible. Not only that, but even those who survived the nights would find their toes and fingers blackened with frostbite. It had honestly been nothing short than a minor miracle, maybe even the will of the gods, that Jorick and his cousin had come out of the harsh winter nearly unscathed. However, they were the only ones they knew to do so, as not one family member or friend, old or young, had not lost something during that harsh winter. You could even count the 2 men among those who have lost something, if you consider the friends and family they had lost along the way. They certainly did. Now, Eric had become accustomed to what he considered the new home, the southern countryside of Brutania. But he still remembered vividly the first time they crossed the great ice bridge and passed through the mountain range to get here. He remembers the day like it was yesterday, because to him it was like he died and joined the gods. He had never seen much grass, but now he saw fields and land that felt alive. It was so polar opposite of what he was used to. It was almost like seeing a trick played on his eyes. And for the first time, his bones finally didn't shiver as the sun's warmth hit his face, without feeling the razor-sharp, endless winter winds stabbing at his face and body. So it was no shock that Eric had quickly adjusted to the life up north. Eric, however, never quite felt right. He didn't miss his home. If anything, his greatest fear was going back. But it was instead something else that gnawed at the man each day and night. It was the fact of what they had become when they arrived in Brutania, and how easily they took to it. For you see, In just a matter of moments, almost instantly, the two took to a life of banditry. Now, to be clear, Eric had no problem with the life of being a bandit, and actually neither did Jorick. Not in the way you may think, anyway. You see, both men, when they had arrived at Brutania, did not come alone. They had actually traveled with quite a large group of men who, like them, had been driven away by the harsh winter lands, who could no longer bear staying in the lands of Argmouth, men who together had become quite the force to be reckoned with. And when this group of men, which consisted of about a little over a dozen or so, which included Eric and Jorick, arrived in these new lands, they had no illusion of a new life. They did not think that a paradise was waiting for them. They knew they would have to fight for every meal, to steal or even kill for their place in Brutania. But to them, it was worth it. To them, at least, they had a chance here. They knew stories of the nations to the north, of the armies they held. It was the main reason so few Southerners made the risky journey up north. They were scared of what would be waiting. But to their surprise, they mostly found farmers and villages with almost no soldiers, if any. Yet despite finding themselves in more peaceful lands than they were expecting, they were still outsiders who knew very little of the culture or land. I mean, they did not even speak the same language. For you see, in the lands of Argmouth, people still spoke the old language, the language of the demons, the language of savages. And because of this, because they were considered nothing more than savages by the northern countries, they knew they would never have a true place among them. They knew that life of a bandit was the only way for people like them to survive in the north, even if in the back of their heads, most knew it could not last forever. So you see, it wasn't the taking of food, women, or even the killing that bothered Jorick. That was just the life of a savage of the south. It was the stillness, the calmness, the ease with which it all came that truly made Jorick feel uneasy. Where were the armies? Where was the resistance? Hell, the only true resistance he and his group came across didn't even come in the form of Brutanian soldiers or armies. It came in the form of another hungry and broken group from the south. Another group like them who had ventured north for a better life. At first, well, to put it bluntly, they tried to kill each other. However, after enough casualties, mostly on the other side, the group would eventually surrender, and most survivors would be allowed to join Jorick and Eric's group. But beyond that little skirmish, there had been no resistance and no casualties. If anything, the group had become larger, stronger, with nothing stopping them for months. And this did not make any sense to Jorick. How could it all be so easy? Not only had their numbers doubled, and not only had their bellies been full for the first time, but the promise of tomorrow had never felt more certain. And in this new group that they had just merged with, Jorick found himself fancying a woman whose beauty to him almost made him think that she was a proper northern girl. That was until he heard her speak. Then it was as clear as day. She was one of them, a true Argmouthian. Her name was Ingrid, and the two quickly took a liking to each other. Even her child, Alma, he grew fond of overnight. They had truly been something he wasn't looking for, something he never thought that a man like him could find. A family. Ingrid's daughter, Alma, was young, but a fighter. She had even taken part in every raid. At first, he did not mind, but as the weeks passed and he found himself becoming more like a father figure, he could not help but have a new sense of unease every time he saw her storm the villages by their side. All he wanted was to keep her safe, even if he knew that she could take care of herself. Now, he wasn't sure if Brutanian men were soft or Alma was a true force to be reckoned with. Because it was more than just a few times he saw the little girl take down a man he swore was twice her size. He had grown so fond of them that one night Ingrid and him had married under the stars and had a warm wedding. Now that was truly something Jorick had never even imagined to be possible. You see, Jorick was a simple man, but one who had been born to only know loss, and to only know the pain and hunger. So now he found himself with his belly filled and heart full. It just didn't feel right, as if he knew that something was about to take it all away, like it was inevitable. But those fears would have to be washed away, because on this calm summer day, he and his people were preparing for the next raid. It would be their biggest one yet. For nearly a week at this point, Eric and a few others had been scouting from afar what seemed like a large village to them. Until this point, they mainly had attacked farmers and one fishing village of about 40 people. But this was a proper village, almost a small town with nearly 200 residents. Still much smaller than the towns and villages further up north, which would reach up to almost 10 to even 20,000. But this was still large to them. Still doable, they thought. They might have been outnumbered, but it was mostly farmers, with the majority of them being women and children. Now, despite the excitement of most of the Southerners, Jorick was nervous. They had never raided a town this large before, and despite feeling confident, something just fell off. For the entire week, his cousin and Ingrid had to talk him into this raid. Still, as the time came near, Jorick couldn't help but feel uncomfortable, as if something was missing, or as if he had forgotten something. It was an odd feeling to him, but one he couldn't shake. But despite his reservations, the night had come, and he would stand side by side with his fellow Southerners. The attack started like any. First, the bandits would set fires to some of the homes to cause panic. And as the homeowners would flee from their burning houses, that is when they would strike. Jorick watched as the chaos began, the screams of the villagers. It was nothing like back south, where he hated the ones that he fought. These people, however, were not his enemy. They were his victims. You see, in more recent weeks, Jorick at the start of each raid had begun to feel not guilty. No, that wasn't the word. Pity. He felt pity for the ones they attacked. He felt shame for how weak and pathetic they were. The first couple to flee was an older couple, barely able to walk. The old woman was being held by her husband. And right or wrong, Jorick watched with pride as Alma hit the old crippled couple to the ground with her club, a club that he had helped her fashion together the night before. There were screams and horror. A few of the village's men had come out with farm tools to fight back, but they were no match. It was like every time before. The only ones who did not fall to Jorick and his men were the ones who were smart enough to flee to the woods instantly. The ones Jorick always thought of after. He wondered what happened to them. It was always something that would haunt him for a few days after. Again, not guilt, but anxiety. In some of his nightmares, he would dream that a large army of all who had fled would come back for the revenge. Yet again, like every time before, the village would fall and the bandits would have their pickings before retreating into the woods to rest after a successful raid. Night would come, and after an evening of celebrating and drinking the pillaged wine away, the bandits would set up camp close to the village. For the next day, they would continue their scavenging of the place. Jorick would spend the night with his wife, who needed her man's attention after such a great day. Her emotions were high, and her devilish smile easily overrode any doubts or fears Jorick had as they spent the night together under the stars. Whilst Alma happily spent the time with Eric, dancing and laughing the night away. But as things would calm and Ingrid would fall asleep away from Jorick, sneaking away to hold her daughter tight, the bandit would lay quietly, his stomach starting to stir again with anxiety as he tried to enjoy all he had, trying to ignore the feeling that something was wrong, that something horrible was coming. But after an hour of tossing and turning, the man finally, with heavy eyes, fell to sleep. The next thing he saw was his wife, holding the daughter, smiling as they rested the night away. His dreams were not kind to him though, as nightmares filled with faceless horrors that attacked Jorick in his sleep waited for him. Screams of villages, mothers and fathers begging for mercy, mercy that was never given. Jorick, like so many times before, once again was the villain in his own nightmares. But this time it was different. The screams felt closer and clearer. It wasn't until he awoke that he realized why. It was the screams that finally broke Jorick from his slumber. At first, all the bandit could do was shake himself violently, rocking back and forth, trying to fully shake away the hangover from last night's celebration. Still, it wasn't until the sight of his cousin, Eric, screaming for him to get up that shocked him to his core. It was as if what he saw wasn't real. His cousin reaching out to him, his eyes wide open as he watched a Brutanian soldier cut Eric down. Dead. Just like that. His cousin was dead. With no time to mourn his cousin, Jorick patted the ground around him out of pure will, searching for his sword. Once his fingertips felt the hilt, the bandit jumped up, screaming in panic as he searched around for his wife and daughter, screaming their names as his men around him were being slaughtered by the Brutanian soldiers. To his horror, he watched as his beloved Ingrid wildly flayed around on the back of a soldier, trying with all her might to stab through his armor, cursing him in their demonic tongue as she did so. Jorick, still on autopilot, ran to her aid, but all he could do was shout and protest as the man she fought got the better of her, throwing her to her back as he spat at her, calling her a savage beast as he lunged his sword into her stomach. Jorick, in shock and full of rage, ran to his wife, tackling the man and without hesitation stabbing him with his blade into the soldier. Another soldier would grab Jorick and cut his arm, but the bandit was fast and with the hilt of his blade knocked the man out. With only a few moments to spare as the fight would continue to get worse for the bandits, Jorick fell to his knees, grabbing Ingrid and begging her to fight, even while knowing what he asked was impossible of her. Ingrid, scared and fading, fought the pain and the blood filling her lungs to speak one more time, her final word being Alma. Despite the nightmare the bandit was living, the sight of his wife dying and the name of his daughter was like a sobering rush back to reality. Jorick looked around for her through the chaos, searching for her, but all he could see was his men dying as more soldiers now rushed to him. To be clear, Jorick was not a novice, but he was used to fighting other southerners in the wild, townspeople and the elderly. He had never been up against a properly trained soldier, let alone multiple of them. Terrified and fueled by the desire to find Alma, the bandit shouted like a man possessed at the soldiers. But it did little to nothing to even faze the trained soldiers as they marched toward Jorick. At first, the bandit saw no way out and simply shook his body in preparation for what was to come, trying to shake any nerves left because at that moment, all he could think was he would not go easily. But right before the first soldier reached him, he heard a scream, and it was his daughter Alma. He saw men grab her legs as she tried to kick them away, lifting her like a bag of potatoes and tossing her into the back of a wagon before one soldier finally knocked her out. What would happen to her? Why didn't they just kill her? Would they treat her as horribly or worse as Jorick's men had treated the Brutanian women? These questions and a million more raced through the man's mind. He could not die. He could not leave Alma to this fate. Still, instead of fighting back, Jorick now kicked over the dead soldier from before and ran as fast as he could into the woods. The day was warm, but the man was hurting and scared, and his chest felt like it was filled with ice as he ran. The sounds of the men behind him chasing him, branches breaking, kept the bandit from looking back. Too terrified that any movement that wasn't focused on running away would slow him down. Every so often, he would hear the men curse him. And despite not knowing many words, he knew still they were calling him a coward. But all they did was comfort him as the shouts would sound further and further away. Too many of Jorick's actions would have him be considered a coward. But to him, all he thought was that he had to live. Not for himself, but for his daughter. The only thing he now felt that he had left in this world. The day would turn to night, and despite his legs burning and his heart feeling as if it may burst, Jorick barely stopped moving, even if his speed had dragged down to a crawl. The bandit, sore and exhausted, even at night, dragged himself deeper into the woods. And with all that has happened to him in just a short amount of time, his body finally succumbed under the calming night sky of Brutania. So then, Jorick collapsed, hungry and tired, and with a broken heart. The weight of all that he had lost came in waves as he lay face down in the wood chips. His eyes glazed with tears. Alma. His daughter's name escaped his lips as tears began to pour. Despite the man's promise, despite what he wanted to do, what he told himself he was running for, the bandit could not help but wonder, how far was it from home? Could he make it back to Argmouth before being found? Disgusted with himself, Jorick whimpered his final words before passing out. "I'm sorry." So, what do you think? Do you believe that Jorick got what he deserved? Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Want to know what happens next to Jorick the Bandit? Then don't forget to leave that like and subscribe so you can stay tuned for our upcoming videos.